All right. Well, hello there. Welcome to the Deadly Analysis podcast. In case you're new to this podcast, we're a group of people that just refuse to walk home alone at night. I just want to start this podcast by making that clear. Some of us live in Chicago, some in LA. It's just like instant death for us, right? The vampires out here shoot bullets, unless you're Jim, in which case it's like the cows walk home alone at night and arrive safely. That's where Jim lives. Another reason we don't walk home alone at night is we've seen one too many horror films. In fact, that's what this podcast is about. Horror films. We take well-made, typically recent horror films, bite down on them and suck out that sweet, sweet intellectual juice, like Hannibal to his Chianti. We analyze horror films. We talk about why they're scary. We muse about their cinematic and cultural value. I'm like really hyped tonight, in case you can't tell. Something about like a girl walking home alone at night, Hannibal. I'm already amped. And tonight's movie is the 2014 film, which just so happens to be A Girl Walks Home Alone at Night. Written and directed by Ana Lily Amirpour and starring Sheila Vand, A Girl Walks Home Alone at Night is essentially about a vampire with no name. In fact, she's just referred to as the girl. And now the girl lives in an Iranian ghost town known as Bad City, a place that reeks of lawlessness, death, and loneliness. And the townspeople are unaware that they are essentially being stalked by this lonesome vampire, one that acts as a sort of vigilante, choosing to feed from those who she considers to be bad, which are most notably dudes, right? This is not an MRA-friendly film. I'm just going to throw that out there, right? Trigger warning for the MRAs out there. So one evening, the girl runs into Arash, a lonely James Dean vibing teenager who has a drug-addicted father who's basically trying to do the best he can to make a living working as a gardener for a really rich family. And so after this happenstance meeting with Arash, the girl starts to get a glimmer of what love may be like, even in a city of chaos and loneliness. So this movie has been dubbed as the first Iranian vampire Western. It's shot entirely in Farsi, although it was filmed locally here in California, I believe Bakersfield. I think like the only truly Iranian horror film I've seen, and it was fantastic, is Under the Shadow, which is currently on Netflix. Highly recommend that movie. So like to me, this was a kind of a weird thing. There was a bit of a marketing issue here, I think, with The Girl Walks Home Alone at Night. Like, I don't know if we should consider this like an Iranian horror film. Maybe we'll get into that. I don't know. I felt like I was a little betrayed when I found out it was filmed here in California. I thought, is it really like a first Iranian vampire Western? I don't know. Maybe we'll get into that. So this movie for me was a bit of a challenge. It was a challenge in the sense that I was so focused on where the story was taking me that I initially missed a lot of the cinema style, a lot of the craft that makes this movie interesting and unique. I was so focused on questions like, where did the girl come from? You know, what's the vampire's backstory? Like, it was difficult for me to be in the moment for a large part of this movie. And this is one of those films that sort of requires you to be in the moment, right? Like, to forego the sort of trappings of traditional monster movies, especially vampire movies, where the story of the monster's transfiguration and their backstory is so often emphasized. So I watched this movie a second time. In fact, I actually watched it a third. I watched it today for a third time because I knew I was missing something. I started to just dig it. Every time I started watching it more and more, there was something about it. And I realized, here's what I realized. I realized that this is a way more artsy movie than I initially thought. Like, for better or for worse, and we'll probably get into that tonight. But at a certain point, I started to see that, like, motivations, intentions, backstories, rules, lore, like, all of that is sort of thrown out the window in this movie. Like, if you're looking at the movie through that lens, you're missing the point, I think, in a film like this. I personally didn't see this movie as having a lot of narrative depth. Like, the story isn't particularly complex or really even novel. I mean, it feels even generic a bit at times, but what it lacks in narrative depth, it makes up for with style. Like, this is a gorgeous movie. Every single shot of this movie is gorgeous. And at a certain point, you know, I started to just care less and less about where the story was taking me and more about the feelings being evoked by the girl and Arash, by the desolate setting, by the shadows, by the lighting, and of course, by the trans person dancing with the balloon. I have said it before and I'll say it again. You can't make a vampire movie without a trans person dancing with a balloon. It's science. Like, you have to have that in every vampire film. You just have to. And this movie showed that. So, like, at a certain point, a girl walks home alone at night, impressed upon me, like, looks and movement and mood started to impress itself upon me more than plot development. And there's a sense in which this movie privileges, I think, imagery over story. And I usually hate that. I really hate that sort of thing. In fact, this may be one of the only movies that I'm aware of where the style, the mood, the ambiance, the looks, the lighting, the sound, like all of those things sort of overtake the plot. And I still ended up enjoying the movie, right? Like, a good film for me to contrast this with is Dario Argento's 1977 Suspiria, which we did a few weeks ago, a film I absolutely hated for some of the same reasons I'm lauding this film for, like mood, ambience, lighting. So this movie was kind of an odd experience for me. It had all the makings of a horror film I'm probably not going to enjoy, but I enjoyed it. And I'm not entirely sure why. I'm maybe hoping our conversation tonight will elucidate why a movie with so little plot development still feels superior to other horror movies in the vampire genre. Just a very strange experience for me. So with that said, I'm going to open it up to the floor. I'm curious to know what everyone thought of this movie, but more specifically, let's open it with like, do you agree with me that this movie privileged style over story? Am I I mean, I can't be the only one who sees that. I just want to start there and see if you guys felt the same way.
You're not alone, Noah. You're not the only one who sees that. Yeah, this is, for a while, I was trying to follow the story. I had probably literally the same experience that you did as I was watching this film. I wasn't necessarily concerned about vampire backstory. That's not all, that doesn't interest me all that much. But it was certain in the filmmaking that I was going to call the director. Give me Ana Lily Amirpour. She's like the trope master general. She was using all of these Western tropes, all of I mean, she's watched every Jim Jarmusch movie. I am sure of it. Even if she tells me that she hasn't, she has watched every Jim Jarmusch movie of all that he's ever made. So it feels like she's cribbing from other directors, other styles, and kind of putting it in this sort of mishmash of a relatively slowly plotted artistic film that is highlighting tropes and individual images rather than character development and story. And I'm like you. I like a good story. That said, I was still able to enjoy parts of this film that I thought were really compelling and really interesting. Not the least of which was just the wordplay in the title. A girl walks home alone at night sort of gives me this point of view that, oh no, she might be the victim of a particular situation. Like she might be, this is an expression of vulnerability, but rather it's actually quite insidious or scary that she is walking home alone at night because she'll fucking bite your finger off and kill you. Those are there's a lot about this film that I ended up attaching myself to and liking, even though I totally agree with you that there's not a lot of emphasis on character development. It's almost going to be hard to talk about this movie because I think that this is one of those films that it's almost better to just show screenshots and say, look at how good this shot is. I know,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
That's it. Yeah.
I think I'm definitely going to have to agree with that too. It's not really going to be focusing so much on the story. Instead, as you sort of alluded to already, like understanding the director is really the key to understanding this film. There's quite a bit here that's sort of thrown together, but it all comes down to the things that I think that Amirpour she sort of loves about music and about movies and about kind of her own sort of cultural context as a person. So, and I think this really sort of goes back into the question that we had too, is whether or not this is an Iranian film. And I would argue, in fact, that it is not an Iranian film. And that's primarily because while she does have that sort of influence, because she's Iranian born, but I think she was mostly through like her family. I think she was actually born maybe in the UK, but primarily grew up in California. And so you have that sort of clash there of, this sort of like this Eastern, Middle Eastern sort of meshed with the stereotypical sort of vision of the West, and sort of those two things come together and kind of what you see in A Girl Walks Home Alone at Night. And that's absolutely paramount to understanding the girl's character as well, because while you have this this head covering, and in the apartment on her bookshelf, I think there is in fact a copy of the Quran, but she herself says that she's not religious. She is obsessed with sort of like this mid 80s kind of like pop culture and all the hits, and this sort of like very almost like stereotypically DJ type persona. These sort of almost contrasting things coming together in a clash that makes perfect sense and perfect harmony. That's really what this film is about, I think, is the emphasis of different sort of contrasting elements coming together in a harmony, which also I think probably is the perfect reason to explain why she decided to shoot this in black and white, right? I mean, it's everything about this. I think there are so many layers to support kind of this contrast motif. And I don't know, like I'm emoting right now because it's hard to pull up words, I think, that really explain how much I really enjoyed this, because primarily of the imagery and why it's not really a story-based movie. It really is just about kind of like those emotions and those different sort of cultures being slammed together in that really interesting sort of song that can only be produced by two things that you don't think should go together, but end up coming together quite perfectly.
Yeah, it's about her. This is an extension of her, the director, 100%.
And
yeah, and
that's
go ahead, Sheila.
That's why I'm going to argue it is an Iranian film. It is really, really hard. I have a cousin who's half Filipino, half white. She grew up here in America. Her mom's Filipino. She's gone to the Philippines. She tried really hard to embrace cultures on both sides. She felt this huge clash. It's really, really hard when you're trying to figure out who you are. And I also have a friend whose parents came, to America. She was born in America, but she still feels very attached to the culture her parents are from. She goes to visit family there and all that. It's really hard being an American and coming here first generation, or having at least half first generation going on in your gene pool. It's what is your identity? You're going to be hated on because you're a person of color and because you're Iranian, but you're also going to get hated on from Iranians because you're too white. And so you just have this constant barrage of what's your identity? What do you identify as? And I think she put that perfect mix of herself in there. It is Iranian, but I also think it's American. I think it's Iranian American. And I think it's beautiful in that she is able to represent herself that way. The actual costume that the actress is wearing in it is a gift from the filmmaker's grandma. That was a legit article of clothing sent from her own grandmother. And she was like, this will be creepy. And so she added that into her own film. It is definitely pieces of her culture and of her, background. And it, in a way, that's what makes it really American, right? Because we're just such a melting pot of people, or maybe it's a salad at this point, because the way people try to segregate, but I don't know, I think that's what makes America kind of really awesome. And when you see a woman filmmaker coming out and representing all elements of her culture, of her life being brought up here in America, that she has Madonna and Michael Jackson and Bee Gees posters, but like with superimposed faces, so they don't have to ask for permission, which was hilarious. But like showing the Western American side of things, it's such a beautiful like story of what makes this country really cool. But also one of the things she thought that was really funny, she was like, oh, I don't know if people from Iran will be able to, relate to some of the stuff in this. And then she went there and they seem to know all the lyrics to Eminem songs and quote all these like, Back to the Future is huge there. And she was in an interview and she was like, I can't wait till, this becomes a bootleg and people are like selling it there in the streets and then everybody can see my movie. She was like super excited for when they'll be able to see the film. So I think she really has embraced both sides of it. I don't know. I guess that's why I will go with it's Iranian.
Yeah, I mean, well, embracing both sides of it does kind of lend credence to the idea that it's American, especially if you're going to talk about America as a hybrid nation, a nation that's able to sort of influence other cultures. But I do agree with the general thesis that it's Iranian, because I think that's where its satirical barbs are. I talked about the double meaning of the title and how the title suggests a certain degree of vulnerability, but it also suggests, like, the costume itself is this this costume that some people, either in Iran or looking at Iran from the outside, would consider that costume to be a symbol of oppression against women. Of course, there are women within some societies who don't consider it a symbol of oppression. And, you know, their points have validity as well. But nevertheless, like, she takes this costume and she refigures it rather than a symbol of oppression, but as something menacing against the male patriarchy within the Iranian society that she's setting her film. So for that reason, I think that it's I would agree with the assessment that it is more Iranian than it is American.
Well,
Well, one thing
wait, I just want to say one more thing.
Oh,
The other aspect I want to layer onto what you just said. So yeah, it's definitely got some American vibes, but in a way, and hear me out on this, she's a huge fan of Western films, and even spaghetti Western films specifically. She's obviously a fan of the what is it called? Once Upon a Time in the West. I could definitely feel those vibes coming up. Sergio Leone. But the thing is it almost feels like a film where someone's pretending to be American, and like taking our pop culture elements and like this is how they perceive all of the things and all the vibes, like the pulpiness. There's a little bit of Quentin Tarantino. There's a little bit of the Western. There's all these like pop culture references everywhere. It almost feels like an Iranian film that like was putting in some Western vibes to like, I don't know. Sorry, I just wanted to add that one extra layer.
It's certainly a hybrid, and there's a lot going on there. But I think, well, my only argument against, this sort of started when Ben said I think it's more an American film than an Iranian film, and I kind of wanted to reply to that in the sense that I think that its target is Iran, whether or not it is its form. I think is a hybrid of numerous cinemas, including world cinema, like the spaghetti westerns, and which have some Italian based, and on and on and on. So it's a weird kind of mix of these movies, and I guess you could probably get me by the end of this podcast to call it an American film because there's such a hybridization of different film styles. But I think it's central, like the target it's aiming at is Iranian culture, I think.
See, I think I want to disagree with that. I don't think it's targeted at Iranian culture. And Shara, it seems clear, like you've probably seen this too. It sounds like you watched a lot of the same interviews that I did, but I'm pretty sure that she came out and said herself in one of these discussions that she doesn't consider it that. She doesn't consider it an Iranian film. Now, I know that the creator creates a work of art and puts it out in the world, and then it becomes sort of a work of its own. People view the film and they interpret it as a person who watches it, and it can mean something maybe different than it was originally intended. But I definitely don't think that the director herself considers it that. And so like that's where I'm sort of like drawing my perspective on that from. And that's kind of why I think that element of culture, yes, it is based in kind of like this sort of random, undefined Iranian ghost town named Bad City. And there are elements of that culture you see there. I think that's just sort of like one element that sort of gets added to that because that's one element of her. And that's just sort of blended in with the rest of sort of like the colors that are used in the palette that are used to create this movie. I really don't think it would necessarily be correct to say that it is targeted at a particular culture. It just seems like something that she created more because like these are all the things that she loves and would love to see in a movie. So here's the thing that I'm going to create. Anyway.
Yeah, I think it's part of who she is. I don't think it's, I don't know if it's one of the, I don't know also if it's targeted at Iranian culture either. But
she actually did say that it was a little bit.
But she
in one of the
also said this
interviews.
is not.
But she said it was like kind of everything. And honestly, like, let's be honest, her target isn't a particular culture; it's a particular gender.
Well, but see, that's the thing, right? What I was going to say is she also said explicitly this is not a feminist movie, which I'm sorry. Like, this is where it goes back to what Ben is saying, death of the author, you know, like, you're wrong. One of my favorite interviews I ever saw was Mark Kermode interviewing Big Dick William Dafoe, Big Dick, for Antichrist. And they got into it about, you know, Kermode said, this is what the movie's about. And William Dafoe said, no, that's not what the movie's about. Here's what it's about. And Mark Kermode said, you acted in the film. I watched it. Right. Like, it's one of those things where, like, there's definitely a feminist bend to this. Like, my God, we'll get into the reasons for that. But I actually want to hijack the most important thing that I think we skipped over. And it was one of Ben's points about the contrast in this movie. The key to this movie is how the director sees herself. 100%. Right. There's a contrast all over this movie, down to the anamorphic black and white, like, maybe to paint the idea that the world is so often void of complex nuance, a world with no real color, that a film that is about an Iranian who's born in the UK, who comes to California, goes to UCLA, there's all of these, there's a hodgepodge, a mixture of culture and art and cinema. There's a background noise to her life that you see all throughout this movie, right? A background noise, by the way, in the film, it's very David Lynch, I might add, which I guess we can get into in a little bit. But I want to hijack Ben's point, because I think that's, like, one of the most important things. So, and this goes back even to Jim, right? A girl walks home alone at night. So it reverses that trope of, you know, the woman's going to get hurt because a man's going to come kill her or something, rape her or kill her, right? So, you know, the girl, the vampire, seems, when you look at her in the movie, she appears simple and meek, but she's a very complex person who loves Lionel Richie and skateboards. And she's a predator, right? So simple and meek, she's actually complex and predatory. You know, she's a villain because she kills people, but she's also removing harm by killing bad people, right? So she's a cold-blooded killer in one sense, but she's also the object of romance and affection through Arash. It's dangerous for a girl to walk home alone at night, but not really, right? So there's these reversals. Almost like confronting one's own prejudices, something like that is in here, right? The film's not really about one thing. Maybe there's a point dancing around this movie, like trying to box something into particular labels and things not appearing as they seem. And I think that's a large theme throughout the entirety of this movie.
Yeah, when you talk about how she says that it's not a feminist film, hilarious. She literally has the character go up to a little boy and threaten him that she's going to fucking kill him if she's gonna be watching him for the rest of his days, and if she ever sees him harm somebody, she's going to fucking kill him. And you know what she's hinting at, because you know who she's been a predator towards the whole time. She's going after sexual predators and guys that treat women like shit and treat them like for lack of better words, cum buckets, or as was put on the pimp's side of his head, a pussy puller, or pussy like it basically means he's stretching pussy, which I mean, just having that put on his head, it's really obvious the types of guys she's, you know, having this vampiress go after. I think it's funny that she would try to say that.
Well, look. It's a movie about a female vampire who hunts men, right? It's a movie where a female vampire reverses the predatory nature of walking home alone at night. A woman preys on a man, not a man preying on a woman. It's a movie where a female character uses her sexuality to lure men because of their desire. Right? It's a movie where a female vampire bites off a man's finger, which itself has certain connotations, and then paints like lipstick on his mouth when she's done. It takes place in Iran, which is a patriarchal society, like Jim said. She wears a chador, right? This movie passes the Bechdel test. Has two women talking about things other than dudes. The girl, I mean, you keep going on and on. The girl executes Saeed and Hassan, both of whom not only were treating women like cum buckets, but almost as important, they were mean to cats. They were mean to cats. and the cat is a feminine, feline sort of trope. So anyway, this is definitely a feminist film. I'm sorry.
Pointing out too that there's hold on.
No doubt, yeah.
No, pointing out too that the cat was supposed to be a placeholder for the mother of Arash, right?
There you go.
Just
there
throwing
you go.
that out there. However, I would say that against this, just to throw kind of like a defensive maybe Amirpour's position on that, is that by and large, what the movie is really supposed to be about, not necessarily in her intentions about feminism, but about transcending boundaries. And so the way that we see this movie as being feminist because of all these things we're listing, I think is really just an artifact of the fact that we had a director and a writer who were the same person and happened to be female, who were completely in charge of the way this movie was made. And so it's made from a female perspective as opposed to what we're used to. And so in the female perspective, like, do you think women are just always sitting around talking about men? No, I mean, that's kind of ridiculous, right? We all talk about relationships. We all talk about the people we're romantically interested in, whatever. But it also makes perfect sense that two women would sit down and talk about something a little more deep, like their experience of the world, their emotions, the troubles they're going through, their difficulties in life. And so is that inherently necessarily feminist in that it's fighting for this particular viewpoint and type of like equality? I mean, like it might fall under the umbrella if you look at the definition of feminist and that it's supposed to mean equality, but it also just seems like a person giving their perspective, and that perspective happens to be a woman's perspective. Like, really, I think it's no more complicated than that.
That is actually the most hopeful thing I've ever heard in my life, because that would literally mean that all we need is more female filmmakers, and all this bullshit will just fucking go away, and we can stop having these 80s giant male man boob guys going, bah, 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 look at all the beautiful women on me. I don't know why I went bad Arnold, but
no, keep going. That was
yeah. If you're gonna pick a trope of 80s masculinity, that's not a bad one to pick. Like,
but like that is a very hopeful stance, Ben. And honestly, I hope you're right. I hope that it isn't feminist. I hope it's just the thing that'll happen when more women are given chances to be creative. And honestly, with technology today, there's a ton more women getting into cinematography because they have these special harnesses that make it to where you don't have to have these big giant like things anymore. You could just literally have this harness and balance your camera out, and so you're going to get a lot more not only female perspective in writing and directing and all that stuff because doors are being opened, but because literally technically we can have a woman's eye filming it. And so I think that'll be really great if this just isn't an issue anymore, and not something I would love for 10 years from now to watch this and be like, haha, I thought that was feminist. That's just normal. And I was looking from the perspective of shitty 80s movies. So yay.
Hey,
well,
so oh, go ahead, Jim.
Let me go real quick. In that sense, then we could probably characterize this as a post-feminist film. A film that takes the lessons of feminism as already, the fights and battles of feminism as already won, and proceeds there. I don't necessarily think that I still think that there's a lot in this movie that is fighting those old wars, which have not been won yet, especially in a country like Iran. But nevertheless, if we're going to take Ben's perspective as this being not a feminist movie, I would then characterize it as a post-feminist movie, one that sort of exists after the wars are over, so to speak. Go ahead, Noah.
I was just going to say really quickly, I have a wrench I'm going to throw in this whole conversation, and I want to preface it by asking a question. I want all three of you to answer quickly. Who in your mind immediately comes to mind when I say the most misogynistic director in Hollywood? Who's the first person that comes to your mind? Not that you think, but that is just considered, you think, overall, like by people, or maybe by you.
The first person that popped into my head was Michael Bay. Okay. And then I mean, I've got others, but I'll just, the first, you wanted the instinctual answer. It was Michael Bay.
Michael Bay. Ben, who do you say?
I don't know enough about directors to actually make that call. I'm ashamed to say. Okay,
your vote goes to Michael Bay. We got two Michael Bays.
Michael Bay.
Shayra, go.
Every director. Like every director. No, I don't want to be that far-fetched and that crazy, but
yeah, that might be a little unfair.
It's just I'm having a hard time thinking of one that's not. And honestly, when I think of ones that are not, I think of Quentin Tarantino, which is like the last one most people think of as of recent.
All right,
but I think he has some hugely feminist stuff.
Okay, so let's go with that. That's important. So Amirpour has stated that this didn't go the way I wanted to at all. Amirpour stated that like I'm totally blowing this entire segment. Who do you think Amirpour thinks the biggest feminist in all of Hollywood is? She's quoted as saying this one director
biggest feminist,
biggest
feminist, misogynist.
No, feminist, not misogynist.
Feminist. I think she's so in love with David Lynch that she would say David Lynch is the biggest feminist.
Lars von Trier. She said that Lars von Trier is the biggest feminist in the film industry. That's what she said.
Can I just reinforce my love of Ana Lily Amirpour? Really.
Yeah, so I thought
so you were expecting. Now I get what you were saying.
Yeah,
you were expecting me to say, or Ben to say, the biggest misogynist working in film today is Lars von Trier.
I was trying to trap you, and you did well. You did
well. I mean, I've seen a Michael Bay film.
I'm kind of mad at Michael Bay now, actually. Now that you say, I'm kind of
But I gotta say, I kind of agree with her because Coming Blood. That's pretty. Oof, that was
that's never left me. That's never
tough.
That's never. I still see it I see Terrifier, the clown from Terrifier in my dreams, and Coming Blood. Those are the two things that have never left me.
From Antichrist, yeah. I don't know. I mean, maybe she and Bjork could have a conversation about that. Let's.
Well, look. Okay, here.
Maybe. Go ahead.
Let me read. I actually have the direct quote here from Amirpour about the feminist label that's being put on this movie, because she was interviewed a bunch and a lot of people were like, hey, it's a feminist film, and they wanted to ask questions about that. So here's her quote. She said, "That probably says more about you than it does me. A film is like a mirror. What I connect with in a movie is my own stuff." There you go. It's what we've been saying this whole time. So consciously, no, it's more about how surfaces are not what they seem. There's more to people than what meets the eye. It's not just women, it's everybody. Everybody in the world in the film, in my mind, is much more than what you see on the surface. All people underneath have strange, weird secrets inside of them. And when you get to see those things, it makes you reevaluate the outside and reevaluate your assumptions. What I'm interested in is not an ism. All of those things confine your thinking because they tell you this is what it is, and then it's done. I think everything has just to be considered in its own individual space and time. So she says that, but here's my counter to that, right? Horror and feminism are inexorably linked through the vehicle of violence. Like, violence lends itself to an immediate distinction of predator and prey, right? Like, to the one in power and the one being subjugated. Those are, there's people that are stronger, inflicting violence on those that are weaker. Immediately when we think of violence. And so there's always a social component to violence. And in this movie, this is a movie where a woman kills, I believe, only men, and only men that fit a particular criteria. So the criteria that we went over earlier. So
except for the homeless guy, was there something that happened there?
Yeah, that's interesting, right? He really doesn't do anything that's bad. Right?
That we know of. But that part, I was like, wait, what? She seemed to be this Dexter character until this moment, and now I'm like, wait, is he a hamburger, or does she read his thoughts, or did she scope out all of his behavior for the longest time and knew to get him? Is there backstory that is necessary or unnecessary?
Maybe she killed that one character so that it would throw us off. Like, if we could just tie her down to a label level, she only kills men who do bad things, then there's a kind of ism attached to that. There's a kind of tropiness attached to that.
She's trying to keep us from labeling things, bitch.
She's keeping us on our feet. The idea is that you can't tie down people to that degree. I mean, that's literally her quote when she was asked if this is a feminist film. So maybe it's something like that. Maybe it's throwing people off. There's a lot of that contrast in this movie. There's a lot of what things look like aren't necessarily the way things are. So maybe this is just another example of that.
So I want to sort of like build on what you just said though about like power structures and stuff like that. And that's a fantastic and interesting point to make about how this all sort of like ties into the horror genre in general. I would almost sort of call that intersectionality as opposed to just feminism though. And so like that really is kind of like at the heart of saying, okay, well, you know, there are these certain classes and groups in society that have power, those that don't, and so that just automatically kind of lends itself to a sort of oppression, whether it's intended or not. And I do want to say that, especially going back to this feminism point, like I really think that like the core, man, like the core importance of the rockabilly in this film, who is the trans person dancing with the balloon, is to kind of sort of also transcend that barrier. And I think like going back to culture as we understand it today in America, you know, we do have groups of feminists, particularly trans exclusionary radical feminists, who don't see that type of person as being inclusive into the group of what they would deem women. And so there's also this element there that certain types of feminism are going to be exclusive to, you know, trans rights and trans people. And so, you know, if we do want to talk about this being anything, it might be an intersectional film as opposed to just being necessarily feminist. Now, I don't want to say that obviously all feminists are definitely not TERFs. That's very clearly the case. Just to go ahead and point that out, but there is that element there as well.
So the trans person is interesting on that note because I think of all the people in this movie, like most everyone in this movie is either affected or they're radically transformed or at minimum affected by the girl, by the vampire. But one of the only people that isn't, who kind of keeps an eye on everything, is the rockabilly, right? I think that may be highlighting the degree to which maybe a trans person knows themselves better than most, that they stay static, that they're not irrevocably changed by a lot of the dynamics of this one person and through the story, through everything going on in the movie. I think of that balloon dance, and I love that scene. I mean, that scene happens, I think, right after the scene with Irash and the girl, right, in her room where she puts his neck up and they're playing that music in the background. It's a gorgeous scene, right? And I think that dance signifies a kind of playing with fire. You know what I mean? Like it's Irash dancing with essentially the girl, keeping it at a distance, but dancing with it, like pulling it closer, keeping it back, you know? So I think there's something there that the trans character is definitely a standout. The rockabilly is definitely a standout character in this, and someone who's not even remotely changed by the happenings of what's going on in the movie. All the dynamics of change and people's lives being altered and people dying and things like that. And I think there's a lesson in that, you know, in this world of contrast, in the world of, hey, things aren't always as they seem on the surface, there's this one character in the entire movie that's static, and it's the one who likely knows themselves better than anyone else. You know what I mean? I mean, this is what we're saying this movie is about. It's about a person. It's about the director. It's about culture. It's about their background and all the shifting dynamics of, you know, Iran and the United States and the UK and all of this. And then there's this one character that's just is who she is, right? So I find that interesting.
I think it's Shakespearean in a way. There's always this kind of narrator type character that is presented in the beginning, who's kind of like, this is our story. And in the beginning, and by the way, I needed to point this out. And when you guys were doing intros, I didn't get to it, but I want to argue that this is not just a film that isn't Farsi, but a film that's also a silent film. I want to make that argument too. In the beginning, when we see the main guy character hanging out, we're seeing it from the rockabilly chick's perspective. She's our narrator. She's the person who stays the same throughout and is just like, here's our story, guys. There was a guy, there was a girl, there was a cat. We were in Bad City. But it's Shakespearean in that element. So I think that's what her character represents. And it's so perfect to have a trans woman be that character and to have a moment of balloon dancing in between. Like, ha ha ha, look at the drama unfold, folks. This is the craziness of the world in Bad City. And it's beautiful.
Yeah, if I really want to elaborate on that scene just a little bit more too. So that's That's absolutely true. Like there's this perspective you could take in which the rockabilly can be seen as kind of like the transition between different acts as well. Like she always sort of shows up when sort of like there's major changes within whatever story we happen to have. But that scene, my God, yes, Noah, I think that you can actually think about this as like you can actually think about this as Arash dancing with the girl. Whenever he first meets her, his perspective is he comes up to her and says, "Don't worry," and makes this conscious choice. I won't hurt you. And I think that's really what kind of like speaks to her heart and like what takes her off guard, because so far the only two types of male characters that she's seen in her journeys through the city at night are those that are afraid of her and those that seek to do her harm. And then you have this guy who, albeit is on ecstasy, presumably, comes up to her in a very warm and genuine way and is so completely vulnerable in his own. Like he can't do shit, but he makes this choice that is significant to him to say, I am just going to see you as a person. Don't worry. Everything's okay. I'm here. I'm just going to talk to you. You know, there's no danger. And so like you can kind of see him maybe from his perspective, he is the rockabilly dancing with the fragile object of the balloon, where if you get too close, if you're too dangerous, like if you're too aggressive, whatever, you might destroy it. But in reality, as we know, and perhaps from the girl's perspective, she is the rockabilly dancing with Arash. This person is right there. She has him in her apartment, you know, head back. She's right there at his neck, listening to his heart. He is at her mercy. He is at her mercy, and yet she's just sort of enjoying him for what he is, right? But there's also this sense in which the electricity between them can easily be destroyed if they go any further in sort of like a physical act or a sex act, right? I mean, if they express the passion that they have, you know, there's also that tension that is represented by the balloon and the kind of like the space between them that once you get too close, that is immediately destroyed, and then their relationship is going to permanently change. Like there are so many fucking layers. There are so many layers that can be derived from this scene that you could talk about probably this one thing from the film for the entire podcast. And I'm not exaggerating. I feel like I could talk about that just for a couple hours by itself. And I think that's a microcosm just for the rest of the film, right? I mean, like, I don't know whether she is actually a genius and whether this was intentional, but as a piece of art, I mean, it works, man. It works.
Yeah, I think your interpretation of that scene is right on. That's precisely what she's going for, and I think that's precisely what she achieves. The question is whether or not you can sort of. I'm about to sneeze. Nope, I'm not. Okay. Where the question is whether or not that type of artistry and that ability to sort of capture those moments and capture the essence of those moments are enough to hang a whole film on. And I think the entire film is kind of built on those long moments of silence and that energy between two people before they touch, and then how that how if they touch is going to irrevocably, I should say, irrevocably change their relationship. I think that's a lot of what this film is about, and vampirism sort of works as a metaphor for that the irrevocability of physical contact. Once physical contact is made, what is that? How does that change relationships? And I mean, I don't know if we want to go back to some of the earlier questions that we were exploring, but certainly within Arab and Muslim culture, you will see couples walking down the street. They won't be holding hands. They won't be doing it but there's a clear relationship between a husband and for example, his wife, and there will be no physical contact between those two people because it's sort of verboten to actually have physical contact in public in many cases. Of course, the Arab world is varied and different in each culture, but in my own experiences with it, I found interesting that I would witness couples walking down the street or couples together, and there would be literally no physical contact between them. And so when we're talking about whether or not it's an Iranian film or an American film, and we're trying to put it in that ism, which may or may not be a mistake. Another support for the idea that it's Iranian has to do with the fact that I think it's exploring that sort of cultural motif that is common in Arab and Muslim cultures.
We also see that in the other scene, come to think of it, where Arash is working on the TV or something for the princess, I think is what they call her, the beautiful lady, the rich lady, and says, you know, hey, I mean, he does this to get her out of the room for a different reason because he wants to steal the earrings, but he says, you know, what do your parents think if we're in here together, right? So that I think that adds more weight to Jim's perspective. Interesting.
I will say this. She captured a thing that's real. When you first fall for someone, but you're like, you don't know if they've fallen for you and you don't know if it'll work. You know, there's that moment where you're like, I'm going to share one of my nerdy fan things with them. Let's see what happens and you know, you test with a movie or a TV show or maybe a record as she did, but you're like, will this react? Will this make them react? Do we connect with our nerdy, like geeky culture stuff? And so she puts on a record and then he wakes up from the dead practically. And then there's that like creeping closeness. Oh, you could cut it with butter. That is romance for me. That is fucking romance to me because literally they're being drawn together by music, by something they both are like nerding out over. And it's that is hot. That is porn for me. And they don't even really do anything, but that, if you wanted to make porn for Shayra, that's exactly what porn for Shayra would look like. Especially the disco ball, like, oh, yes. Perfect.
Yeah, Shayra's Pornhub account is just clips from A Girl Walks Home Alone at Night. It's just the spinning ball clip.
Hers is the only porn where nobody touches each other.
Yeah. And you know, in that scene, I think like that entire song is played out. Almost the entirety of that song is played out during that scene. Like it's like 4 minutes, that scene. Like this is a very meditative movie. It's very slow and calm. And Shayra, you mentioned earlier that you wanted to make the argument this is a silent film in some ways. It really is. There's almost no dialogue in this movie. Like we know the dialogue sequences, but overall for the entirety, was it like an hour and 40 or whatever this movie is? I mean, there's very little dialogue. There's elements of Nosferatu in this, heavily in this. Oh, that's what I was going to say. The scene with when the girl finally meets Arash, and he's empathetic and says, "I'm not going to hurt you." That was clearly the most important intellectual part of it. But my favorite part of that was her skateboarding and seeing Dracula look up at a light bulb, just staring at it. And she skateboards and she just kind of stops and goes, there's like a moment where she's like, what the fuck did I just see behind me? And kind of turns around and does this. That was probably my favorite part of the whole movie. Like there's a lot of little comedy things like that in this movie. And that was the one I dug the most. Like the irony of a vampire skateboard. I mean, think of that. Like, a vampire skateboarding down an empty street sees another vampire-looking dude dressed as Dracula looking up at a lamppost. Like, what? You couldn't make this shit up. That's insane. Probably my favorite part of the movie, to be honest.
It's the most real part because it's the kind of shit that actually happens and the actual things that bring us together as people. We're like, do you need something? Are you okay? And they're like, oh, I don't hurt you. Whoa, where am I? You're just like, oh shit.
Yeah, it threw her off though.
It
totally threw her off though. I think Ben's right. Like she's used to a certain dude, right? And this guy comes up and immediately says, "I'm not going to harm you." And he's clearly he's inebriated on something. He's messed up, and I think she knows that. But it just makes him look all the more innocent and cute, you know.
And woke him? What woke him?
Yeah, the music,
art.
Yeah.
It's gorgeous. It's true romance.
One more point about that scene too. I think it's really good if we go back to the contrast element for a moment, where we kind of first start to see the contrast in her character, because obviously, like I think the embodiment of the girl really in that particular point, we begin to see that not only is she vicious, but she can be vulnerable. Like she's not necessarily ferocious only, but she's also feminine. And you really kind of like start to see like that character development too. And the character development that we see doesn't necessarily even have to come about through dialogue. It's really just about kind of like these visual elements that get pulled together, where she's dominant. She's dominant for the entire movie up to that point. She's attacking, like the pimp or whatever, and like totally just like fucking him up. But like at this point, she gets taken off guard, and you kind of like start to see a little bit of that sort of like sensitivity too. And no words were necessary for that to happen. It was just this moment where she saw this person, her facial expression, her body language, the shot, all of that stuff framed the character development for us without a single word needing to be exchanged. Oh, my God. My God.
Gorgeosity. I'm going to borrow from last week. Gorgeosity.
So all of that is beautiful, but I gotta say the most beautiful part of this movie that just touched my heart was the pimp dancing, doing this dance thing to her. That hit me in my soul.
I don't know if you guys watched which videos you guys watched on the making of this, but I think my favorite nugget of information, let me know if you heard this one. He has tattoos all over his body. This actor is not a pimp. He does not have tattoos. This is a very good old boy looking nice guy. You know, he's got the nice guy look, but she had to make him look kind of scary. So she wanted to put tattoos on him. She got her mom to do the calligraphy on him. She had her mom make him into this scary character. And honestly, like, he does embody that like scary predator monster type. And it's so funny because there's two predators in the room, and you know it's a cat fight. It is literally a cat fight about to go down. Like, who's going to win? And you're just waiting for that. Like,
well, not only that, but one in that scene, one clearly looks like when I see that scene, I'm scared for him. Do you know what I mean? Like, and I was scared for him. Like, that little sex thing on your neck's about to get ripped off.
He thought it was a tiny, cute little mouse, but no.
Yeah, what's that old redneck saying? A barking dog doesn't bite, right? Like, it's the person that has to put the tattoos all over themselves and look scary that isn't necessarily the one that's gonna do the most harm. It's the meek little vampire that's about to bite off your finger. One more interesting thing about that character, though, too, is that like his persona, and I think I noticed this and I saw this before I even watched kind of like the interviews and stuff about like the character development there, but Amirpour, she based this person off of Ninja from Deontward. And I think it's so fucking obvious. Like, I love that she did that. And it also, again, points to another layer in her character. We get character development for the director through this movie, not just the characters. Let me go ahead and point that out. But it shows us how important music is to her decision-making in her life and like her artistic choices, right? Like, how important is music that one character in this movie was entirely devoted, or at least based on the image that this one person puts forward in this like weird, random, obscure kind of like EDM rap group from South Africa, right? How cool is that? One more.
But on top of that, she robs him of all of his joy, thinking this is how she gets her cash. But she gave that to the other woman. What did she actually steal from him for herself? It was CDs. She stole his fucking music. I was like, oh my God, this is the most beautiful thing I have ever seen in my life, because that's how I feel about music. Sometimes when you find those like really obscure, like random bands, you have this CD that probably only 100 of them have been made, and it's just some random thing. This actually happened with there was a documentary made about this singer band guy, and Kurt Cobain wore a t-shirt with his tape cassette like imagery on his shirt, and then all of a sudden everybody wanted to know who this musical artist was. They were like, who's this guy? Blah, and they wanted tape cassettes, but they were obscure. You couldn't find that shit. It was rare music. That becomes gold. And that is, if you are a vampire and you live forever, right? What is going to be your gold? What is going to be your silver? It's not going to be gold and silver. It's going to be culture. It's going to be the things from those moments in time that you lived in. And that's why she's listening to stuff that might be more 80s style, or, might even have some kind of weird twist of another, decade she lived in. She is so old that she's like, I have to still feel attached to the culture that I'm living in right now. So she has to find elements of these other cultures she's lived in through time and attach it to the one that she's living in now.
Well, you just gave me my backstory that I was looking for in my intro. I like that. That's that I did not think of that. That's really cool. You're right. That's what a vampire would want. They would want something that lasts, right? Lionel Richie, remember that? Like, yeah, that's something that lasts. This movie's
Music.
very boundary pushing, I think, in a lot of ways. I mean, some of the ways that we talked about tonight, but also consider that, you know, the girl in this movie is kind of both the villain, but also the final girl who leaves the city, which is strange. It's a very, I can't think of many other films that have something like that. But I think overall, looking at this movie, I think the lens we're all looking at it through, the one that seems to make the most sense and explain the majority of this movie the right way, is the contrast, looking at complexity versus simplicity, black and white versus color. The director as, you know, someone who you may think is fill in the blank, but who actually is fill in the blank, like simple but complex. And I really dig that. I think that's what
there's also a time situation I really feel necessary to bring up. Okay, so hear me out on this. When women have been on the earth long enough, we've realized there's generally a problem with certain parts of mankind, right? We start to get a little bit bitter, and you see this in the character who's in her 30s, and the pimp is talking to her, and he's like, so you're not gonna be able to make babies soon. Your parents are probably gonna like be pissed off about that. You know, you should probably, you know, make some babies. And so it's all these ideas of like what it is to be a real woman, right? And it's this idea that you're not supposed to age. First off, you're not supposed to age. You're not supposed to grow old. That's wrong. You don't want to get to that point. But also, there's just this part of all human beings. You don't want to die. That sounds horrible, right? Well, some of us were totally fine with dying. And there's a whole meme culture behind that. But, you know, there's this idea like, oh, I don't want to die. That's what vampirism is. That's where that whole trope comes from. It's this idea like, I don't want to die. I want to read every book. I want to watch every movie. I want to listen to every album. I want to absorb everything that ever existed. But you'll get a bitterness. And you see this in, you know, Anne Rice's books, this idea of like, you just start to get a little bit, everything gets old. Everything gets redundant. Nothing ever gets better. And like, what do you do with your life at that point when you can just actually predict everything because you've lived so long that you can predict how horrible humankind is going to be to one another? So I definitely think it attached to that. And that's why that moment when she's skateboarding and sees Dracula looking at a light, that's why it threw her off. She's like, the fuck is this shit? Because she's lived for so long through all this bullshit, and this guy is just like, I'm an innocent guy. And she's like, what the fuck? That doesn't exist.
Well, she's enamored by it in the way that he's enamored by the light bulb. Right?
Yeah.
Like,
moth to flame.
Yeah. They're both, yeah, there's a sense in which they're both doing that in that scene. One because of MDMA and the other because of empathy. And like, what is this thing? What?
He's so cute. Look how he's so helpless. Aw. But that's actually what happens to us women as we age. As an old woman, I get to say this. We can become very bitter, and we become very angry at some of the bullshit that's happened to us. And we're worried about other women going through certain shit. So, and she might not have even been thinking of this from a woman's perspective. It just might be her perspective on the world. But you just start to get to this point where you're like, I can't trust anybody. Everybody's shit. And then you see this innocent person, and you're like, oh,
a puppy.
Look, he's so cute. and you know, you melt. So
yeah, for those that don't know, Shayra is actually 85. She's 85 years old. She yeah, this is she's just got a good complexion.
It's the skin cream, I think.
Yeah.
Well,
it's because I never leave the house.
Like a vampire.
The sun sucks.
So I want to comment on a couple things that were said. First, Noah, you talked about how the girl is both the final girl and the predator. I wonder if Amash isn't the final girl, and that there's that moment in the car where you know, there's the tension is almost built in the sense of, is she going to kill him, or is he going to, like, what is his reaction to finding out that about the death of his father, etc., etc., and that instead of violence, they choose love. They choose to go off together in sort of a romantic, the kind of a romantic end. And another thing that I thought about while you were talking, Shayra, was we got this moment where he's staring up at the light bulb, and that's the moment where I think there's a lot of his tough guy tropes had been washed away. And so when we first meet him, he's framed in this kind of James Dean archetype, and these kind of rough and tumble Western tropes that are getting explored through both the costume design and through the way he's standing, smoking his cigarettes, and on and on and on, and the sunglasses.
Cool car,
exactly. And all of that gets taken away from him, and instead it's just this dumb, easily see-throughable artifice of him being a vampire. And I think it's sort of I guess what I'm trying to lead us toward is this film seems to be saying something about love and relationships as one of those things that kind of transcends the tropes and the isms and the other bullshit associated with vampiric society and Iranian society, etc., etc. And I'm wondering if I'm the only one who picked up on that, or if that's something that you guys were.
Are you saying love conquers all?
I am not saying love conquers all. I don't think love conquers it all. Remember, I just argued for the horror version of Love Actually just last Friday. So no,
Loved that.
I do think you.
Love conquers all, whether you like it or not.
I think that, but I'm not saying that. But I'm saying that I think the film might be saying that. And that's an interesting thing for a film to be saying when we've got these themes that we've already sort of sussed out about feminism and hybridity and the interchangeability of labels, or the lack of lack of the application of labels, whether or not love is the thing that actually transcends all of those aspects of culture and society. That we may not be able to find a nice guy in Iranian society, but as long as we've got one guy who likes the same music that you do, well, then we can make it work and leave Bad City. At least that's how I viewed the ending of this film and some of the other aspects of it.
Well, I think so. Let's look at the scene at the very end where Arash gets out of his car and she's looking at him and he looks back at her. Is the balloon gonna pop? That's what that scene is about. Is the balloon gonna pop? The tension is there, and what ends up happening is the balloon dance continues. It doesn't pop. He gets back in the car, and that dance continues on, and we'll never know, right? So I think
wasn't that so much like the ending was so much like God damn it, I can't think of the name of the fucking the Graduate. It had such a Graduate ending where they're just awkward sitting in silence together, and you're like, did they make the right decision? Where does this go from here? Is it okay? Are the actors even knowing that the film is still going? It's like,
that shot was so much like one of the shots from Pulp Fiction, though, that I thought that's what she was referencing rather than The Graduate. The Graduate is this moment where it's like, where they've got this euphoria about this radical thing that they just did, and then the reality slowly starts to dawn on them, and they're like, oh shit, we just ended a marriage, changed our lives, and I don't really know if this is the right idea, but I'm stuck with it. Like, that's how I see that last moment of The Graduate.
That's what love is. That's literally what love is.
Yeah, that's how I saw the ending of this movie. Literally, the way you're describing it is are we making him, at least for Arash is like, is this right? I'm going to stop. I'm going to take a breather and I'm going to look over. Is this the right thing? And he ends up driving away with her. So, I mean, I saw that as a quite similar ending.
But that's romantic to me. And once again, maybe this is just a sign of my weird idea of romance, but like, that's literally what you do in a relationship. You fall for each other. You might even do something like, you know what? Let's do this. And you start to like think about it and you're like, is this crazy? Am I crazy? This might be crazy. I think
answer
I'm
is
losing my fucking mind. You know what? Let's go with it. And
The answer is always yes. Yes, you are crazy.
Yeah, love makes you do crazy things. That's part of. I think that is how this ending is meant to be interpreted.
Can we talk about the build up to that a little bit though? I mean, because like I feel like one of the most important elements of this movie is going to be Arash's relationship with his father and how that kind of plays out.
yes.
One of the things, yeah, like one of the things that we really think about in the ending of this movie, especially when you talk about Arash's his kind of like internal monologue, you know, am I crazy? He just found out. I'm pretty sure he just realized because the girl has that cat. I think he figures out that she's the one that killed his father,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
And whether or not he's okay with this. And so like the build up to this, obviously, and like I guess this is the part where we go into like heavy spoilers, is that he has this fight with his father. It's about his father's addiction. It's about how this man is kind of like dragging him down because of like his sicknesses and his illnesses, which also I think is probably commentary on like patriarchy, and like you could probably have a divergence about that as well. But so he kicks his father out because he's tired of all this. He says, here's what you want. Here's this money. Here are these drugs. Get out. I'm done with you. I'm cutting ties, for better or worse. And then suddenly he finds out the next morning that his father is dead in the street. Now, I don't think that he had a different expectation about that, right? Like, I don't think he wanted that to happen, but I expected that when he handed his father a bunch of drugs and shit, that he probably wasn't going to make the best life choices. He wasn't going to clean up after that one last hit of heroin, right? I don't think he expected that the girl that he's been sort of getting more interested in was going to be the cause of that death. And so, like, that pivotal moment, whenever he stops the car, they're at the crossroads, and he gets out and he has that little moment where he kind of like thinks about what's going on. You don't know what's going to happen. Maybe he's going to react negatively, but he doesn't. He just gets back in the car. He pulls a tape out. He puts in that music, and they go on with their lives. Really fantastic, really kind of interesting. And again, like if you want to sort of layer in kind of like the conversation there about, you know, okay, we're going to shed the biases and the illnesses of our forefathers. We're going to move forward with this new dynamic and this new understanding of each other as people, and yes, sort of tying that into a love story. That also really makes me wonder though, because this is so clearly kind of like a love story-ish sort of like driven film. Like, how much is this really a horror film? This is something that I'm wrestling honestly, like this is something that I'm really wrestling with having viewed this, and I'm pretty sure that it's supposed to be. It has definite horror elements, like not just because one of the main characters is a vampire and because like we have these callbacks to Nosferatu and like film noir, but I mean there's so many genres being piled together here that I think it's really confusing as to what exactly it is that we're watching as far as a genre film is concerned.
It's clearly a rebel without a cause for the modern age. No, I mean, you're right. It's, in my mind, this is a great love story, but I also had that same kind of feeling from, I think it's called Warm Hearts, or I can't remember what it's called. It was the zombie love, like Romeo Juliet film.
Warm Bodies.
Warm Bodies, that's it. Thank you.
Nicholas Hoult, yeah.
Yeah, that was a romance movie. Like, people are like, oh, it has zombies. Okay.
Yeah, zombie love story, and love ends up curing zombieism in that film, and whether or not, oh shit, spoilers for Warm Bodies. Anyway, yeah, love ends up curing zombieism in Warm Bodies, and love conquers all in A Girl Walks Home Alone at Night. Yeah, there's certainly something. There's a lot of romance. There's not a lot of lovey-dovey stuff in this movie, and I'm not always on board with it. I
hate romance. I hate romance. I loved this idea of romance because it's dark and fucked.
It's not, but it's not though. There's no sense in which I don't necessarily think that A Girl Walks Home Alone at Night 2 is going to be Arash's death. Like, I think they're gonna
I agree.
make it go.
I
the
agree
question is whether or not what's going to happen when he gets old and stops looking like James Dean.
Unless she makes him a vampire too, or whatever, and hopefully there's no sequel to this movie. That would be
right. I mean, that's
worst sequel ever. I don't know how you actually. That would be a good challenge for you. How would you make a sequel out of this? You couldn't. That's my argument.
One of the possible Deadly Analysis shortcuts is pitch a sequel to a horror film that doesn't already have one. So I don't know. Maybe I
could. Are you guys both challenge accepting this?
I don't think I have an idea for a girl who walks home alone at night too. I think I'd have to know the director a little bit better than I do in order to do that.
Well, you already saw this. I mean, World War Z. We hit World War Z. So
we did.
And you guys did a pitch for this. I think in one of your. So World War Z 2, Love Conquers All. And basically, what happens is just the love. One guy gets up there in a mic and just says, "I love you" to all these zombies, and they're just cured suddenly. Their skins doesn't fall off anymore. They all come back to normal.
All of that's exactly how love works.
Yeah, it's science.
It's confirmed.
Watching. Yeah,
and psychology too.
Yeah, but no, I think again, going to Ben's point, is this a horror movie? So we've done is this a feminist movie? Is this a horror movie? So this is the point of the movie.
Is this an Iranian film?
Is this an Iranian film? So that's the key. The key that the director threw.
What the fuck is this?
Yeah, what are we what is this? And to answer what is this is to ascribe a label of sorts, to confine in some way, even if it's appropriate, right? Whether or not we think it's appropriate or not. And there's a sense in which this is a horror podcast, so it makes sense to ask the question, I'm really struggling. Is this really a horror movie? Same thing for me. The only reason it's a horror film to me is that there's a vampire in it. The sequences of violence are very quick, fast. They're not drawn out, and then everything else is slow.
And they're almost justified. So it's whatever. Yeah.
So at a certain point, it's but you realize for the last hour and 20 minutes, we've been dancing around the question, is this movie X? How does it fall into this category? And I think that shows the director did a really good job in bringing up particular points that show the complexity, the anti-black and whiteness, if you will, of just who she is as a person, how she threw it into the movie. This movie is an extension of her hands. Do you know what I mean? And so when we ask these questions, we're proving her point. We're saying, obviously when we try to confine this movie to particular boundaries, we end up realizing that it's not that simple. And these are the answers we've been providing each other all night, is that it's really not that simple. Here's why. And that's what it's like to be an Iranian American who, went to UCLA and went to film school. This is her life that we're essentially talking about. She's also in this movie. It's one of the things we didn't bring up, is there's a scene where she's actually in the film, but at the party with the princess. So kudos to her, because we've been dancing around what she wanted us to dance around all night with that balloon, if you will. Good on her. This is there's a lot more to chew on here than I initially thought.
What you're saying is this black and white film is not so black and white.
Not at all. Not at all. Yeah.
I agree. And I think the other thing is she's a hopeless romantic, but about the realism of what is romantic, what is love. We're all broken. We've all been shattered in some way. We've all been cracked and chunked away in some way. Life continues to kind of mess you up a little bit.
We're all in Bad City.
We're all in Bad City, all of us. And the cool thing is you get to find a broken person that is, kind of on your level, and you get to be broken together with your cat happily ever after. And you know what? That is a beautiful story. I don't know if it's horror. But it is beautiful and I love it. And I wanted to before we go off into other worlds, I wanted to give a shout out to her cousin Sina. Sina is the producer of this film, and ever since they were little teeny tiny kids, and I appreciate this so much because I was the same way as a kid, and I used to get my cousins and sisters and family members and friends and put them into my weird podcasts and movies I'd make. Her and her cousin would get camcorder her dad got, and they would make movies. And at first they started to try to emulate like commercials and stuff. Like they did a Zestfully Clean commercial. They did other commercials. I did that kind of stuff with my family members, and Sina grew up with her into this place where he was actually the producer of her first feature-length film. And he's also the owner of this beautiful fucking cat that's in this film, which they put in this movie and is probably the star of the fucking film. But I want to give a shout out to him. He did die recently. And it's really sad that this person who she was super creative with and was able to make these wonderful things with her whole life, it's sad that he did die recently. And I just want to give my love to family members that work in that way together creatively. And I wish my family members were still working with me creatively in that way. That would be awesome. But I don't know. I felt that in my soul. It's just when you find your family, whether it's blood related or not, when you find your family, those are your brothers, those are your sisters. And I'd like to think that you guys are, kind of like brothers to me at this point. We've been around here for a while together. And
we're gonna make a Zestfully Clean commercial together when we hang out. It's our first project.
You're not fully clean until you, oh wait, I don't want copyright.
Yeah. For artistic purposes, yeah, we're not. Yeah, yeah.
I said cest. It's SIST.
Yeah, we're cyst fully clean. We got no cyst on it. Yeah. Well, God, I'm so sorry, Sheila. You were talking about something so serious, and then
it's very
really
sweet.
is.
And then we started talking about copyright.
But
Yeah.
Like
that's pretty postmodern of us.
Yeah,
it is postmodern. But I just think it's so beautiful. Like the idea you worked with somebody for so long, like your whole childhood. It's like I feel for her, and I don't know if she'll ever watch this, but I love that. I think that's great when you are family like that. It's so cool. So, and I love that fucking cat. God damn it. That was like the perfect cat actor.
I
thought it was professional
too. I think that's her cat. I could be mistaken.
Well, I think it is now. It was her cousin's originally, but she called him her brother though, because they grew up together so closely that she called him her brother in many interviews. So, and in fact, he's in the posters. She superimposed his face on one of the posters in the background. I think she even put his name on the poster, and he has like luxurious hair, like flowing and stuff. And he was like, I wish I looked like this. She's like, you do look like this. What are you talking about?
That's really cool. I didn't know that. That's really interesting. She poured herself into this movie in layers, just family, people. It's about her. I really respect that. I mean, a lot of films in a lot of ways are like that with people that write and direct their own movies, but this feels like we're talking about a person. You know what I mean? Every element of this movie that we're critiquing or that we're finding interesting or fascinating is an element of who the director and the writer is, all of it. And that's really cool. You know what I mean? It's almost impossible to separate a person from a lot of what we're saying here. It describes the complexity of a particular human being that's walking this earth. And I find that fucking fascinating. I think that's awesome. In fact, this conversation has made me rate the film higher. I mean, I don't know if we want to get into that, if you guys have any other things you guys want to add, but I had a particular score coming into this and it's a lot higher now.
Well, there's a different. I mean, I'll just real quick. We could go to final thoughts in a second, but my quick thing is, I watched some of the interviews. I think some of the similar interviews that Sheila and Ben watched as well, and the energy of the film and the energy of the director are vastly different. Like the director is just she's a mile a minute. She reminds me a little bit of the way Quentin Tarantino talks, and she's effervescently cool. And the film is very slow and deliberate and careful. It's got some weird things, some kind of manic pixie dream vampire moments where she's skateboarding down the street and all that. But overall, the film's got a very slow and deliberate pace to it, which is very different from the energy that comes off of the director during any of her interviews. And I find that to be I don't know. I find that to be interesting, especially because I agree with the fact that most of the things we're talking about, we're actually talking about the director's sort of what she has put out there as her persona.
Yeah, that is really interesting. I definitely see what you're talking about. There's elements going both ways though too. Like her personality does seem much more energetic, and maybe a little bit more ADHD. Like if you want to like color it in that way, I think that's the best way that I know how to describe it, is that she's a little bit everywhere in some ways. In her interviews, whereas this film is quite the opposite. And like you have this, like you were saying, this very deliberate pacing, this lack of dialogue as opposed to an overabundance of words, this this emphasis on the minutia. Like, okay, and this sort of calls into the reference about like spaghetti westerns and stuff, where you have these shots that are incredibly meticulous and close up, also contrasted with these like large landscapes, and like all of that is very purposefully done. But I also think that this film couldn't have been made by anybody but her. And like, that's what I think I really do enjoy about this. And so this isn't going to go into my final thoughts like too much, but I do think that is an amazing quality to have. And there are a few directors that I know of like, I'm not like a huge director expert, as I've already revealed earlier in this podcast, but there are a few directors that I think that you can really pick out and say, yes, this is a David Lynch film. This is a Lars von Trier film. This is a Quentin Tarantino film. This is a Ana Lily Amirpour film. And so that makes me have a lot of hope potentially for her career. Like, she has 2 feature-length films now, the other one being The Bad Batch. I think some of her current work is focused on TV episodes, but I really do hope to see some of her work in the future with feature-length films. I think she's going to do a really great job. And I think I wanted to throw the question out there of whether or not it's a good thing to have films that are so like quirky and unique and bizarre that you can say this is absolutely this director that made this, or if we want to have things that are like more generic and like pop art. But it's something that I really appreciate, because it tells you that this isn't a person, I think, that's just making films for money. They're making a film because it's art that they want to create, right? So like, that's something that I really appreciate.
There's a sense in which Von Trier is like that too. That I think he pours a little bit of, he peppers a little bit of trollery onto that. But I think that when we watch a Von Trier film, we know we're watching a Von Trier film. We can go, I see what you did there, you sly fuck. So, you know, and he's clearly, according to Amirpour, the most feminist director too. So he's got that going for him. Hey, you guys follow me here. Yeah, there's a thought I had when you guys were talking about sort of how the director fits into this film, how the writer and director fits into this movie. You know, everything in this movie is ambient. There's the lighting in this movie. Almost every character is lit by ambient lighting, even during the day. And that itself is kind of analogous to even the scene with Dracula looking up at the light. Lighting plays a big role in this. It's almost like we see everyone else through the perspective, through the light of who the writer and director is. I think like all these characters are lit by one particular thing. The sun plays a very small role in this movie, except for pieces of the intro and maybe one or 2 small scenes throughout the course of the movie. But even then, even during the scenes of the daytime, characters are actually lit inside of their house by ambient lighting. Which is itself, I think, interesting and unique. I think the camera work, the lighting, and some of the stuff we didn't get even into with sound, I think is representative of this director. That like there's shadows all over this movie, and there's shadows of who the director is. Like there's something there with that. It's the director casting herself onto all of these different characters and the dance that they all have together. And that's unique in this movie. I can't think of another movie where everyone is cast in ambient lighting in the way it's so obvious in this movie, you know, and it could just be because it's anamorphic black and white, but it's on purpose. Like we're starting to realize how on purpose it is, you know, which is cool.
Well, that's what's funny, because everybody was saying, oh, she's in the movie. And I'm like, yeah, everywhere. Like, I think it's even in the cat. I don't know how she got her cat involved in who she is, but I think even the cat was representing her at that point.
She just went for it.
Even from like that, I think what you're talking about now is really representative of kind of like the film noir style, right? So it's like you have either people are shot at night, and so you kind of only have that kind of that incandescent street lamp light on them, or in the daytime they're indoors, which I don't think it's necessarily just because we're talking about a vampire film, because like it's everyone, you know what I mean? It's like vampires really can't go out in the daylight, but in this film it doesn't seem like very many people do, except in the cases where like you're going out in the morning and you see Arash's father, you know, in the street and stuff like that. But like, yeah, like what you're talking about, I think is kind of like her influence coming from drawing yet another genre into this film. But one other layer that I want to throw on this too, it's like, yeah, like she permeates every scene, every word, every shot, and she's literally in the film. And I don't necessarily think in this case it's a bad thing. There are examples of films where the directors literally come in and play characters, and I think it doesn't work. Because
I know
arrogant.
which movie you're talking about. I know which movie you're
but
talking about.
But it seems arrogant.
Sorry, I finally sneezed.
It just seems so like, god, like it's cringy when if you do it the wrong way. It's cringy if you do it the wrong way. But in this particular case, like the role that she actually played was very minor. She was like in a party. She just kind of showed up a little bit. It was almost like a Stan Lee cameo in an Avengers film, if you really want to think about it that way. But I don't think it took away from the film in any way whatsoever. I think it was actually quite interesting.
This was Lady in the Desert. This was a better cameo if there ever was one by the writer director.
Can I make a weird argument?
Okay, I was gonna let me do a brief other sidebar real quick. I'm on her IMDb page right now. She is rumored, her next feature-length production is rumored to be a remake of the 1993 classic Cliffhanger.
Wow.
Yeah, that's I don't think she's gonna permeate the film as much in that one.
She's the one who like falls off the thing when Stallone's looking down, like holding her hand, you know? Yeah.
That's what's interesting. And this is what will make my argument interesting. She's remaking films now. What the fuck? But I'd like to argue that if she continues down this weird path, she might even be able to do a remake and still remain an auteur, which is rare today. Auteurs are rare today. I honestly can't think of any. Maybe the director of The Room, but like honestly, I don't think auteurs are really common today. Like this weird person who's the actor and the director and the writer and putting all of their actual self into it. That's very rare today, and I feel like she did that with this film to a point where I'm like, she's a fucking auteur. But if she's doing Cliffhanger, that's going to be really the question, right? What she does with that film is going to see if... I think that's where we'll see if she's an auteur.
How great would it be, though, if Arash and them were in Cliffhanger, like it's the sequel, basically? You know, like that's what I want to see. You know, we have a Deadly Analysis segment where we pitch ideas. That's what I want to see. I want to see the girl in Cliffhanger. That's what I want to see. I'm going to make this work. That's going to be my next pitch. You think I'm joking? I'm going to make this work. Watch.
We do have a question coming up. What horror film? Wait, it's something along the what horror film character from one horror film would you put into another horror film in order to improve it? And perhaps the girl in this film in Cliffhanger would be an interesting idea. I don't know. I'm a little concerned about any sort of remake, but I think you're right, Shayra. The auteur theory is going to be put to the test when we see this director do Cliffhanger.
No, here's what it's going to be. It's going to be a lot like the homage that we see in the second Ace Ventura film, where he's actually there and he has that raccoon, except it's going to be Masuka the cat. Like that's going to be the connection there, right? It's going to be Cliffhanger, but kind of like Jim Carrey, who is actually in The Bad Batch, and he's going to be trying to rescuing Masuka the cat. Like that's the film right there. Boom, done.
Oh my God, you gave me a good idea. All right, here's my. I'm sorry, I know we're getting way off track. This is this is my bread and butter here. All right, so the girl, the 30-second version is the girl and Arash go. They leave Bad City. They get into mountain climbing. It's their thing. It's their gig. It's how they find closeness. They listen to some Lionel Richie while they're up there, you know, hanging out, and they go for it.
Wait. Before you continue, can they sing hello? And then the echo goes, Hello.
Exactly. Now, what they do, oh my God, this works on so many levels. All right, so they go there, but they get lost. And the next thing they know, they start to notice snow, and they're like, wait, I thought we're in the United States. How did we get here? You know where they end up? They end up in Pontypool, and that cat becomes Honey the cat. Honey the cat from Pontypool. That's how we're gonna make it work.
And they pass by Tom Cruise hanging off one of the ledges, just posing.
All right, yeah, people know this is what we do here on this podcast. We are quite insane. I'm gonna make that work. I'm gonna tie these together. All right, I'm sorry, I'm nerding out a little too much.
If we ever actually decide to make a Deadly Analysis film, we're gonna have this like round top table. It's gonna have to be round because this is just how we do things. You know, we're very much authorian, right? So, but we'll have maybe we'll have this dry whiteboard that's round around us, and everybody's writing on the boards, and we're just throwing out all these crazy ideas. It's just this crazy world, and then that's what we end up coming up with.
Yeah, on the whiteboard, it's going to say nobody's seen Honey the cat, and then we're going to have an arrow except the girl.
Except the girl.
And Arash. Oh God. All right, my head's spinning. All right, we got to segue out of this. I could talk about this for hours. Do you guys want to score this movie?
Yeah, we're ready for final thought.
Whose film selection was this? I completely forgot.
Ben.
Okay.
This is on Ben's list.
So let me give my Ben. If you want to close up with yours, I'll start with mine. I mean, I was going to come into this giving this like a 3 out of 5, only because it was a little slow for me. Like the film really settled down one thing. I like when it settles down into one thing. It never settled down into a love story entirely, a horror story entirely, feminism entirely. Like it never was at the end one full thing. But through the course of this conversation, I'm realizing that's largely the point. That the ism, the labels assigned to this are the thing that the director, wants us to sort of move away from, to see the complexity of being a particular sort of person in this world. And so what I initially saw is like something of a criticism, knowing how personal this movie is and how it's an extension of who she is. I'm a little more apt to forgive that than I usually am. Take that, Argento. So look, I mean, very little dialogue. Didn't bother me as much as it usually does. So not a big thing. Moments of horror are fast and brief. The execution scenes. But overall, like I felt like this movie is an homage to a particular set of cinema styles, more so than it is about like a traditional narrative message in horror, something about like the futility of life or death. You know what I mean? Like it was about a person. It wasn't about some, what I always say in this podcast is that horror films that I like are movies that stick to a particular concept and flesh it out in some novel way. And whatever that concept is, it's very basic and central to the human condition. The idea of who one is as a person. So for Sheila, being replicated, removed, abandoned as a person, the removal of autonomy rather. For Ben, it seems to be this idea of the contemplation of death, and a very specific contemplation. For me, it's somewhat similar. So there's these concepts, but this movie's about a person more than it is a narrative style, like a central story. I mean, it has that, but I'm way more apt to forgive those things. Like I don't even say forgive anymore. It just doesn't bother me when I watch this movie that it doesn't have those things, doesn't hit me the same way as some of those other films. So I was going to give this a 3 out of 5. Honestly, I'll probably give it a 4 out of 5. It didn't scare me, and if I'm going to go higher than a 4, I gotta be a little scared. I gotta have something last and linger that's unsettling. This kind of made me feel warm and like happy, and that's not bad, but it doesn't last in the same way a good scary thought does. So I liked the homage to silent films, more specifically Nosferatu, the Western style Man with No Name. There's a Eraserhead in this. A lot of the industrial sound, the sound design in this movie is utterly fantastic. The film noir aspects, characters being lit by ambient lighting throughout the entire course of the movie, and the sort of nether realm atmosphere that all of those things combine give you. You know, there's almost a sense of banality to like daily life and the viciousness of living in reality and sort of the black and whiteness. And this movie's a challenge to look at things in a more nuanced way. And so I left with something different than what I went into. And I think this conversation really lit up, really kind of, you guys served as the ambient light. The sort of, I feel like a rash just looking up at the light bulb after this conversation, sort of getting more out of it than I thought I did. So I give it a 4. I want to give it more, but I just wasn't scared. And I feel like this is a podcast where fear is heavily weighted. So I would have given it a higher one, 4 out of 5. That's the highest I can give to this, but I feel like that's really good for me, all things considered. So
I'm gonna go for mine review, because I think Jim and Ben should end this, because if you actually put Jim and Ben in just a show all by themselves, which has happened here on this channel, it's a fantastic show. We could just cut out me and Noah here and just have Jim and Ben.
No.
Yeah, why are we here? I'm actually leaving. I'm actually leaving right now. Like this is
We're not cutting you guys out. We love you too.
Yeah.
You're
but
staying.
like I honestly, I do really love the combo. Jim and Ben.
When we have 2 hours, you guys get to stay. When we have 15 minutes, Ben and I can do it.
That makes sense.
But when it's 2 hours, you guys are here.
I like that. But I'll go so we can have a Jim and Ben ending. So it's epic. So this movie is absolutely beautiful to me. Not just the visuals are enough, honestly. The fact that it could be a silent film, the fact that you probably could watch it without any captions and still understand what's going on. The fact that the characters are so pronounced that not just from the black and white, but because of who they are, you probably don't need any language or any kind of conversation to understand what's happening. It's huge. That is really hard to accomplish. And honestly, that's what film is supposed to be, right? It's lighting and it's reflections of society, but also it is an idea that with just the visuals, you could tell a story. This film does that so perfectly. And so in that way, I understand why it's in the 1001 films you must see before you die. It's not just on our list, it's put in the lists. And there are some people that have put it in their like top 10 movies to watch in the last 2 decades. So it's definitely up there on important films to watch. So if you're not just looking for a horror film, this is a film to look at anyway, just because it's got all these elements. It's got that pulp fiction stuff. It's got the Western stuff. It's got different kinds of cultures all intermingling. It has different types of people intermingling. It's so fucking gorgeous. Every aspect of it is just so fucking beautiful. But the other thing about this film is you have this idea that we don't want to die. And that's what vampires are all about. That's why we have these kinds of stories. And I think even more horrific than this idea, like, I don't want to die, is the idea that you live forever and can't find love. And, I thought at one point in time that this idea of love was bullshit. That people had lied to me that love existed, and I was like, there's no such thing. I've grown up now. You guys have lied to me. This isn't a thing. It wasn't until my late 20s, and maybe even later for some other people, where you're like, oh shit, love, okay. And I think that this film perfectly captures what that is. Whether you find love when you're young or old, it's crazy when it happens. But it can feel surreal. It can feel fake. It can feel fiction. Even when you're living through it yourself, your brain is telling you something's off. And you're like, I should run away, but I'm going to sit right here and I'm going to experience this. And she captured this real human thing so fucking well. I don't think I've ever seen anyone capture this horrific thing that happens to us. And I understand what you mean, Noah, when you say that's not horrific, but falling in love is pretty horrific in my mind, just because I have fallen in love at at an older age, and it felt scary because I was like, I've given up on this shit, and what the fuck is this shit? So for me, it was horror. If that sounds
No, that makes a lot of sense.
Falling in love is scary. It's not okay, because then you start to realize, oh, I'm not going to be just me by myself. I'm me plus. I'm milk plus. Like, what is this shit? What have I become? You've changed the entire combination of my chemistry. And then you have to figure out how you work together forever and how you can make that last forever.
You got to dance with the balloon.
It's exactly it. It's fucking beautiful. It's fucked. It messes with my head. In a way, I have this sappy, like, hopeless romantic side that I always try to hide from the world, because fuck anybody knowing I'm a sap. I am a sap. I did like a recent Netflix film. Was it Always Be My Maybe? I recommend it. I actually liked a rom-com. Holy shit. I have some sappy sides of myself, but goddamn, it's also a horror film. You could literally take the rom-com from Netflix and put some different kind of music to it, and it's not okay.
Well, you know, just to really quickly add, why it's a horror film, I think in a lot of ways is because to piggyback on what you're saying, is when you love someone, you're giving yourself, like, the deepest part of yourself to that person, and that's like walking on a ledge. That's like a cliffhanger, if you will. It is, that's what it is. That's what it is, and that's scary. You're totally right. As a component to falling in love, it is it's a monumental thing, and all monumental things have an aura of being scary at times. There's some of the more long lasting, and there's no net under me, no safeguard under me should I fall sort of moments in your life. So it makes sense that it would hit you that way. I totally get that. I get what you're saying.
Yeah, we let down our walls, and we let somebody into our really fucked up side, and it's like, oh, this is who I am actually. And they're like, are you okay? I killed your dad. I sucked blood. I stole your cat. You still cool? We cool? We cool? Are we good? Oh, you started the engine. Okay. You started the engine. You're fine with that shit. Okay, we're good.
Yeah, it's almost like the equivalent of it's almost the equivalent of, like, here's all my exes, here's what I've done, like, let me be a clean slate to you. Like, you know what I mean? Like, that is kind of what that is. It's I'm going to tell you something, and it's going to put our relationship in jeopardy. And are you going to leave, or are we going to still drive off together into the sunset? You know what I mean?
And
So,
that's the two tensions, right? You have the tension of the coming together, and then you have the tension of, are we leaving together? And those are two wildly horrific tensions. Are we both drawn to each other? Are we both leaving together? That's the two tensions of love. And holy fuck, is that horrifying to me personally, because I've experienced that shit. I actually told my entire family and friends to go fuck themselves for love. And they all cut me off for a couple of years, actually, for falling who I fell for. I had to cut off my cultural and social and spiritual life for love. That's what happened at the end of that film. And I know that horror. I know why there was a hesitation. I know why there was that lull in the car, but they took off anyway. And it's fucking beautiful, and it's scary, and I love it. So is it scary like I jumped out of my seat? No, but it's real shit, and it's fucked shit. And so I just want to point this out, Ben. You're doing pretty good on your film choices. Holy shit, this is a 5 out of a 5 for me. Fuck, that movie is amazing. Love this shit. Mwah. More women filmmakers, please.
Whoa.
More Ben films.
5 out of 5. Oh,
Yeah.
shit. That's high. All right, congratulations, Shayra. That's all right. So I'm at 3 out of.
Yeah. I was gonna say, where Jim comes in. I'm thinking a 2, solid 2.
I mean, this give it a 1. I actually I left the film at 2. I turned off the film and I left it at 2. I'm like, this is too slow. I understand basically where it's going and what it's doing, but it's doing it very slowly, and sort of it required a lot of patience, and so I left the film at 2. I entered the podcast at 3 after sort of letting it marinate and sift around in my head. And now my official rating, this is the one where I'm up to 3.5, because I
Wow.
think that it's been a long journey here to 3.5, and I think this is where I'm going to settle. And a lot of it has to do with some of the things that we talked about in the beginning. You know, the criticisms that I have of this film is there isn't a story for me to sort of latch myself onto. The story is really simple. The story is rather. The story is not. There's not too much going on in the story, but then as I start to think about it more, I sort of go on the same journey that Noah talked about, where maybe that's the point. And so am I faulting the film for things that I'm putting on it rather than taking the film at its own merits? I also really like your interpretation, Shara, where you talk about how this is the horror of coming together and then the horror of leaving together after you reveal yourself. And, you know, I almost wish that I had more dialogue-based character interaction so that I could see that being done not just through images but also through words, because it's true that sometimes we just connect through motion and through action and through looks. It is true that that is one way in which we communicate, but it is also true that we use our words. And for somebody who spends most of his days using his words and most of his professional life word-based, linguistically based, it's harder for me to personally connect to attempting to reach a love connection through simply motion and action and voice and touch, or motion and action and touching and not touching, and the choice to do those things, do those actions. It's a little bit different, at least as I sort of negotiate the planet in my own head. But nonetheless, I see the artistry of this film. I see a lot of what this film is doing, and I like a lot of what this film is doing. But the actual experience of watching it and the actual story construction of it is not necessarily my taste. Therefore, I'm recommending it, but with sort of some reservations. Ben, you wrote Revenge for Clockwork Orange in our private chat when I gave Clockwork Orange a 5 out of 5 last week, and you gave it a 3.5 out of 5, and you think that maybe my 3.5 was just I was aping you in order to get revenge upon you. Does that mean that you are going to give this film a 5 out of 5 as well?
That's an awfully high bar to set.
What's that?
That is an awfully high bar to set, because if I were to give this film a 5.5, for me, that would set it at the same bar that I set Seventh Seal. And I don't know if Amirpour is quite at the level of Bergman.
They're both black and white.
That is true, and that's the common bar. Any film that is in black and white automatically gets a 5.5, and that's my entire review. Thanks, and this was the Deadly Analysis podcast.
Well, I don't necessarily like. I've given a couple films 5s over the course of I've given one film 5 over the course of this podcast. But I've given like Bug and Requiem for a Dream and Get Out 4.5 out of 5s, and I don't think I love those films in different ways. So you can take that Bergman stigma off and not necessarily say that any film that I give a 5 to is as good as The Master. And by the way, yeah. So
if you want to say that's your favorite movie,
you go
give it a 5+. If you want to make that your favorite movie,
5 is fun. These are ratings.
Give it a 6.
This one goes to 11.
You can't do that. It screws up my spreadsheet. All right, we're interrupting your final thoughts, Ben. Go ahead.
No, that's okay. You're giving me a sufficient level of tension. I feel much like a balloon, if you will, in this particular situation now about to pop. So I think we've talked a lot about the artistic merits of this film already. Somewhat contrary to a lot of our reviews, that seems to have been a lot of the focus. Not just about the directorial skill that went into pouring her soul into what this work of art was, but also the callbacks to many different genres in a way that made sense and didn't seem to clash. We have westerns, we have love stories, we have horror, we have film noir. And obviously, as Shara said, we have like clashing cultures, sort of like melded together in a way that makes perfect sense, and that sort of like sing together in a really nice harmony. As we've seen in different podcasts that we've had already, like I'm not necessarily one to hang my hat on plot. And while this did have a very simplistic plot, like usually the love story narrative isn't something that really super impresses me, I guess. Like I'm not a giant fan of rom-coms. But I think that's okay in this particular case because everything else was so substantial that it didn't really need it. And I don't know if it's necessarily like Gaspar Noé in that way. Like, I mean, if we want to talk about Climax, how that is primarily a technical film that is interesting because of the way that it is shot rather than what's being shot necessarily, I think. It may be one way to explain that. But I want to move beyond that because we've already talked about that enough. Like what I really do want to discuss a little bit more is whether or not we can call this a horror film. And I think that we can. And Noah gave me a really good transition into this because a lot of the films that I pick are meditations on death. And as Shara mentioned, the vampire is the perfect monster to think about what it means to be an embodiment of death. In the character of the girl, we have many conflicting yet harmonious elements. You know, we've talked about viciousness versus vulnerability, but I also think we see both life and death. And not just because we're talking about a female vampire with the power to both take life away, but also give it through birth, presumably. I think that's necessarily kind of like inherent to the theme of the film being change, where you see the dying of the old and the birth of the new. And so if we do want to think about this film being a horror film, we can put it up there with those films kind of like Seventh Seal that are ultimately meditations on what I think the ultimate theme of horror is, which is the contemplation of death, whether that be through personal death or the death of a particular type of culture or a set of boundaries that we set on ourselves as a society. And I think probably this film is an example of the latter, where the fear primarily is probably that fear that we become stuck in that which is traditional and which is old, which prevents us from having sort of like these new blossoming experiences and loves and relationships and becoming one with ourselves with ultimate self-awareness, kind of like we see in the character of the Rockabilly. So in that particular avenue of thought, I do think this, not just because we're talking about a vampire who literally brings death to certain types of people, but because it is along those same lines of that ultimate meditation of what we should think about when we're thinking about horror. Because of that, for me, I do have to obviously rate this quite high. I don't necessarily know that I can give it the same score that I gave Bergman, though, because whenever I watched it, I didn't have that same internal experience. I mean, like, you know, I mean, like that might be an impossible bar to set, that I may never see another film that does that to me. But this film is good because it speaks to all the same types of things, I think, almost, albeit in a different way. Something that is more modern or perhaps postmodern because it draws on film developments that have happened since Bergman's time, and also has like sort of like these cultural clashes that didn't necessarily exist in the incandescent light of the streets at the time that Bergman was creating films. But it's along those same lines. And so because of that, I think it is absolutely fantastic. And while I cannot give it a 5.5 only because it did not make me cry primarily, I'm still going to have to give it a 4.5, which puts it right up there for me among some of the highest rated films that we've done on this show. I absolutely recommend this. This is a must watch.
Well, that's a pretty highly rated movie for all of us. Did I give it I gave it the lowest, I think.
No,
No.
I did. You were at
Oh.
4 and I'm at 3.5.
Oh, that's not surprising
I
all.
know. For those of you at home who are keeping score, Jim's average rating is 3.28 and Noah's is 3.84. So, I don't know what that means. Anyway.
It means you like math a lot.
Yes.
Well, I mean, it actually means
I can do
Jim
Excel.
No, it means Jim has standards. That's what it means. That's what it means.
Yeah, I'm not the one who gave fucking Climax a 5.
Oh, love Climax.
Ta-da.
Oh, wait, we were talking about the movie.
Yeah.
Oh, I misunderstood. I'm gonna have to
That's all
change my score. I meant something very different that I can't
Okay.
talk about.
Yeah,
on
either
the
way, for me,
podcast.
that still doesn't go to 5 out of 5 for me. Like Bergman still supersede better than sex. Better than sex.
Bergman is still better than an actual climax. Oh my god.
Dude, you do realize we're gonna start sending you death porn. Like, it's just gonna
Yeah.
be death on the beach walking. You
Yeah.
do like the black and white starkness, you know, the chessboard pieces
God.
moving together. Anything that's black and white, that's his porn.
I mean, if y'all want to start calling me Thanos, I am perfectly fine with that. Because I am, in fact, in some ways, courting death, if you will.
Oh my
Yeah,
God.
no snapping though, Ben.
Well, as always, week after week, they have given me no possible way to segue appropriately out of this conversation. Next week, we have a very special evening lined up. It's essentially going to be like a Who's Your Daddy segment. It's going to be interesting. Shayra, you want to give your 30-second version of what we're doing next week?
Yeah, I'm gonna try something, and you guys are gonna see if you like it. But I'm gonna start talking about different characters in horror films, and I'm putting together what I can only establish is the only video on the internet that will be talking about this, but the different kinds of horror daddies
Like
that
that.
exist. So yeah, for Father's Day, I'm gonna give it daddy issues, kind of editing of multiple clips of awesome movies you guys need to watch, and if anything, you could watch it just to see what stuff to watch with your daddy for Father's Day and feel very awkward and ask him questions about how he raised you. So, you know, check it out at least for some ideas of movies to watch with daddy.
Yeah, on Mother's Day, we actually all held hands and I cried as we watched Hereditary together. It was fantastic. So that's what we do here on this podcast. We work through these things. What a better time to do that than Father's Day, actually. Fathers in horror is not something that's explored a lot, so this will be kind of cool. And then week after that, we're doing Ravenous, which is 1999 Ravenous, not 2018 Ravenous. It's Cannibal Ravenous, not Zombie Ravenous. How about that? So join us. I will be definitely eating a rare steak that evening. Jim will be eating hair, pulling the hair out of his throat, like this right here. It's gonna be great. It's gonna like that, and it's gonna be amazing. Just join us every Sunday night, folks. That's the point. If you liked tonight's episode, check us out on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Also, check out our website, deadlyanalysis.com. We got a lot of interesting stuff there, little bios about all of us, although you probably learned more than you would like to tonight about each of us. Hey, but you know what? That was the theme of tonight. The director threw herself out there into this movie, and tonight you got to learn a little bit about each of us, especially that a lot of cows walk home at night where Jim lives. A lot of cows. Check us out next week, and we'll see you guys like we do every Sunday night at 6 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. Thanks for watching. Have a good night.